Hey, welcome back. It is time again for our smartphone roundup 2025 edition. We're going to get right to it. We have 4 exciting phones for you guys to look at this time. We have the iPhone 16 Pro, we've got the Google Pixel 9 Pro, we've got the Samsung S25 Ultra, and we have a 4th phone, the OnePlus 13, which is going to be a stand-in for the plethora of other alternatives that are out there on the market besides the big 3. And I had a little bit of time in Japan to play with the OnePlus 13. We want to add another phone just so you guys get more of an idea of what else is available. But we can only do 4 phones, otherwise this video would be an hour, and nobody wants that, right? Okay, so we've already done reviews on the Samsung, the iPhone, and the Google. I've got time on the OnePlus, and hopefully this will give you guys a bit more of a well-rounded experience of what we're looking at. I'm Chris Nichols, this is PetaPixel, let's get to it.
It's Jordan here, and I want to tell you, in our comments lately, I've been getting a lot of people telling me, you've been making great choices with your music lately, but I can't take any credit for that because I've been using Audio's AI tool, Hans. Just type in the type of scene that you're looking to film, like photographer taking pictures in night at Tokyo, and Hans will give you 6 music choices, and consistently I find at least one of those are absolutely perfect for the video I'm using. And in the past, if I wanted to look at Audio's great music selection, I'd have to wait till I got home on my computer. But now we've got the Audio Pro app, so you can browse that same great music library and produce video on the go. The only kicker is you're going to need an Audio Pro subscription for that, but don't worry, I got your back, because using our coupon code by clicking the link in the description below, you can get 70% off of an Audio Pro membership. So thanks so much to Audio for sponsoring this episode.
And we're here in my office today just because we have so many samples to analyze and look at, and I want to have it at my fingertips. And this really leads me to my next point that I want to make. I mean, we make this video because we wanted to give you guys some education on what situations some of these phones might excel versus others, so you can find what's better suited for you. But the fact of the matter is, smartphones are not like cameras when it comes to reviews. There's so many nuances and changes, differences in processing, differences in AI technology, differences in how the manufacturers approach certain optical challenges. So smartphones are a very personal choice, but I still feel like what we talk about here will be valuable for you guys. We're going to be doing some rankings, but that's really more just to keep the narrative flowing and keep it interesting. But in the end, I'm really going to try to give you my own opinions, my kind of feelings overall on how these phones operate, and then hopefully that'll be useful for you when you want to make your decisions. Now, as many samples as we have for all the different phones, we also want to do side-by-side comparisons for you guys, because I find that that's most useful, really to see apples to apples. So first off, big thanks to Evelyn from TCS TV for helping us out, because operating 4 phones on the go, trying to get all the same shots in the same light is difficult, even with 2 people. Anyways, we couldn't have done it without her, so we really appreciate her help on that. So let's get right into it. And I want to talk first off about just the cameras that you'll find on these phones and the sensors behind them. Okay, so let's start with the ultra-wide cameras on these 4 phones, and a few things I want to point out. First off, all of these are now hovering around that 48 to 50 megapixel mark when you shoot them in high res mode, and that's where we want to do our test charts. The other thing I want to point out is both Apple and Samsung have improved their ultra-wides this year. I mean, that's an important piece of technology, and I think it actually does show. So let's get into our results. The OnePlus is going to be at the bottom here for ultra-wide camera. It's a good sensor for sure, collecting enough light, but we find that it has sort of that last generation look. Still good detail, but a little bit soft compared to the other phones. Next is going to be the Google Pixel. This actually won last year as having the best camera over the ultra-wides, and it has really good general purpose detail. I like the way that it falls off to the corners as well, but when we then go to something like the Samsung in number 2 place, you can see it's absolutely retaining more detail. Unfortunately, the Samsung still does have that sort of over-sharpened, over-processed look in the ultra-wide, and we're not getting quite a lot of detail retained in the money. You can see right there where a lot of those lines and details get lost. This is where the iPhone is still excelling, because although it's not as over-sharpened as the Samsung, the iPhone retains a lot of that information in detail, even in those very small, fine details. And so that's going to be our best ultra-wide so far. So next, let's look at the main cameras. This will be what you primarily shoot with, and this is going to be the best image quality that your cameras can deliver. And so this is largely going to stay the same because the fact of the matter is Apple, Google, and Samsung are using the same hardware from their last year's phones. Now, of course, we're also adding the OnePlus into the mix. It's a very large, very bright sensor, but I don't feel that OnePlus can quite maximize the hardware the same way that the other companies are. When we go to the test charts, you'll see the OnePlus certainly still takes really nice photos. The main camera is absolutely good, but we're not quite getting the same detail level as we are with the other phones. But now here's where things get a little bit tricky because I'm actually gonna put the Apple in third place. I mean, I love the results from the main camera. As you can see here at the high res main camera mode, we're getting really good detail, slightly over sharpened, but we're still retaining a lot of that information, even in the small details. And I think it looks beautiful. When we look at the Samsung though, I'm gonna give this a slight edge just because although the main camera does still look a little bit over processed and over sharpened, you can control that level and bring that down a little bit. But more importantly, the Samsung can shoot 200 megapixel files, and it's actually a really cool trick. I mean, if you've got a situation where you can keep the camera steady, you've got a scene where you want maximum detail and resolution, that 200 megapixel mode really does work well, and it gives it a slight edge, I think, over the Apple's results. But I'm still gonna give first place to the Google Pixel 9 Pro, and this is the same result as last year, and that's because when you look at its 50 megapixel files, they just have a great combination of not too processed, excellent detail retained, and good sharpness. And even in the real world, we see that the Google Pixel shots just tend to have a nice realistic look to them and a beautiful rendering. Overall though, all four of these phones are performing really nicely with the main cameras. And now let's talk about the telephoto cameras, and this gets pretty dicey here, okay? Because first off, last year with the iPhone 15 Pro, you could choose to get the Pro with a 3x zoom or the Max with a 5x zoom. But now with the iPhone 16, whether you go Pro or Pro Max, you're getting the 5x zoom regardless. And I do feel like it's still the weakest of the telephoto cameras. I mean, it's limited to 12 megapixels, and you can see here, we're just not getting a ton of detail. What is very interesting though is now when we add the OnePlus 13 into the mix, because I'm gonna give this a tie between the Google and the OnePlus. Because when we look at the OnePlus 13's 3x zoom, optically it's fantastic. I mean, comparing it to the Google Pixel's 5x zoom, I would say the Google has just slightly more detail. It is giving us that more telephoto range, but they're very similar. So I do think that Google still has better overall telephoto hardware, but I'm gonna still make it a tie because a lot of people love having a 3x telephoto, and on top of that, look at the OnePlus 13's 6x digital crop. It is a crop, but it's very useful. It goes a little bit further than the Apple iPhone, and I would say it's only slightly less detail than the Apple iPhone's 5x telephoto camera. So good on you, OnePlus. And I know what you're saying, hang on, the S25 Ultra also has a 3x telephoto camera. It certainly does, but it's weak. It's not great. I mean, the OnePlus blows it out of the water. It's the smallest and weakest of the sensors on the S25 Ultra, and I far often prefer just to use the 5x zoom or the main camera even cropped. But anyways, you've got it, it's there, but it's not really worth talking about. The big surprise here this year, Samsung's 5x, I feel like it's just got a hair more detail over the Google Pixel, as you can see here. Nice clarity, you know, it's easy to handle, it was stabilized well, and I feel like it's just got a slight edge in image quality. Okay, let's talk about portrait mode, and this is also a really tricky one because we really got to get down to the nuanced look of the depth maps, the way that renders the background, skin tone, all of these come into play. And we did a couple shots. So we did some portraits of me as well as of Evelyn because we have different faces, different lighting, different kind of hair, and we really wanted to test what that was going to look like and how it was going to change things. I'm gonna actually start off with putting Google and Samsung tied together, but at the bottom here, they've both improved their portrait modes and they are really nice results. And it really does depend on the situation. With me, where my hair is not flying away, it's fairly tightly cropped, you can see they actually do a nice job with the way it falls off the shoulders, the way it cuts me out from the background, and fairly nice rendering of the backgrounds as well, the actual out of focus areas. I will say though, you'll definitely notice that the Samsung has maybe nicer, more natural tonality. Google is absolutely softening the skin. I don't necessarily love that for my skin personally, but you definitely notice a bit of a softer look. The Samsung's retaining a bit more of a natural kind of look to it. But when we go over to Evelyn's portraits, things change a little bit. Here I feel like the Samsung struggled to get the depth maps looking as natural with some of those flyaway hairs. You can see where it just kind of cropped a channel in between the hair and her head. That doesn't look normal. And here where it blends in the background is just kind of like a brick cutout. That looks kind of strange. As well, I would say that some people might prefer the way the Google renders skin tone in other portraits. I mean, the softening effect can be really nice in certain situations. Some people might like that. Again, the OnePlus, I'm going to say that it has really effective depth maps. I like the way that it renders hair against the background. And the only thing I'm going to pull away from the OnePlus, both in my portrait and Evelyn's portrait, the lighting looks a little bit harsher. It's just doing too much contrast. But the reason I'm not going to ding it is because this is something that you can bring down. Out of the box, I don't like it on the OnePlus, but reduced a little bit, I think it's going to give us a more natural rendering. I'm still, though, going to put the iPhone 16 Pro and Pro Max at the top of the heap because they just tend to have the nicest looking depth maps. It's natural. You can see on my portrait where it fades off with the shoulder, it does a great job, but also in Evelyn's portrait where it goes from the front of her head, even just to the hair flowing to the back, it just looks more natural. So iPhone, I think, still has the nicest portraits and the skin tones look excellent. It's time to talk about low light and night photography modes, and the results, it depends. So first thing we're gonna do, let's look at a controlled test, extremely dark with the phone stabilized, okay? So looking at this result, when things get really dark, I feel like the iPhone really struggles. I mean, we're losing a lot of shadow detail. It's blocking up into just pitch black. It's quite noisy and it's quite soft, okay? Our next result that I would say does a pretty good job is the Google Pixel. It does tend to block up some of the shadows though, but at least there's some more detail there. The OnePlus actually impressed me. I mean, it has pretty good shadow detail. We're not getting a ton of noise, and actually things still stay quite sharp. But I'm gonna give a slight edge to the Samsung S25 Ultra with its nightography mode. I feel like it retained the most detail and did a good job exposing shadows in this controlled situation. But then I want to do another situation where I'm shooting in very dark conditions using the night mode on all four phones, but I'm shooting handheld and just a different lighting situation. Here we get kind of a different result. The iPhone still struggles. Honestly, it's night mode. I feel like it has a hard time. We're losing a lot of detail, as you can see, but things get a little bit more complicated when we look at the other three phones. I feel like the Google Pixel's night mode is doing a really good job of keeping the exposure a little bit lower, protecting some of those highlights, but some of the shadows do block up. When we look at the OnePlus, again, it's just overall a little bit too contrasty, but we're getting good detail and sharpness. The highlights are getting a little bit bright, but they're not too blown. Shadows are getting a little bit dark. I feel like the Samsung S25 is still excelling here when it comes to night mode as far as giving us the most detail. Some of those highlights are pretty bright. I'd want to drop that contrast and processing down a little bit, but the shadow detail is exactly where I'd want to see it. Regardless, all three of these phones are pretty similar, but then I did another test where I'm shooting kind of like half light. It's not completely dark. It certainly isn't bright. And things change all over again. So here you can see the OnePlus now is using its night mode. I turned it on, but we're getting a little bit of softness. It looks a little bit processed. The S25, this actually does an okay job, a little bit sharper, but it definitely looks like kind of yucky when the processing kicks in, and that's something you want to pull back. The iPhone actually impressed me here because the iPhone will only engage night mode when it thinks it needs it. And in this half light, it did not engage night mode, but I love the detail that I'm getting. It looks very natural and very realistic. And the only thing that keeps it from being number one is you can see there's a bit of noise here. And here's where the Google Pixel excelled in its night mode, because here I feel like we're getting good sharpness, we're getting good detail, it doesn't look processed, and it does control the noise. So my final rankings when it comes to low light, I don't know. I have no idea. I mean, I guess it really depends on the situation, and hopefully this speaks to this kind of thing I was saying at the beginning where you cannot just simply say 1, 2, 3, 4. It's very nuanced and it really depends. Okay, so I need a break. Let's go to Jordan. He's been testing independently the video features on these phones. Let's see how those rank.
All right, it's the other one, Jordan Drake, to talk about how all of these phones are going to compare when recording video. And I definitely want to give you a caveat right from the beginning. We're going to be talking about the first-party software that is included with the camera. There are a lot of different options if you want to expand the video capabilities of all of these phones. On the Android side, you can go to Motion Cam Pro, which will allow you to record log or even raw video right to the device, or just use the Blackmagic camera app for a lot more manual controls. Same thing if we jump over to iOS. You've got Kino and, again, Blackmagic Camera to expand some of that manual functionality. But if you just use the included software, here's how they rank. Starting at number 4, that's going to go to the OnePlus 13. Now, this sensor does have enough resolution that it's capable of recording 8K up to 30 frames per second. We can also do 4K 30 and 60 frames with full manual controls. But oddly enough, if you want to record 24 frames per second, you have to open up a separate portion of the app, their movie mode, which will give you 24 frames per second. Now, looking at the 8K video, it does give you a small resolution advantage over what you'll see with the 4K recording mode. So if you want the absolute most detail, use the 8K recording, but it's certainly not going to compare to the 8K that you'll see in larger sensor cameras. Third place is going to go to the Pixel 9 Pro, and when this first came out, I'm like, there's no new video functionality on this. But last year, Google introduced the ability to send your footage up to the cloud for additional processing to include the quality of it, and they've definitely expanded it this year. Now, if you're using its upres functionality, where it'll take your 4K footage, upres it to 8K for you, honestly, there's no real detail improvement. It's just a little bit more sophisticated sharpening, and if you zoom in a lot, you'll see less pixelation, which is great if you want to just like pull frames out of your video footage. But I did actually find it quite useful in extreme low light or when using very long telephotos. The footage that comes back from the cloud is significantly improved, which is a great feature. Just remember, you're going to need to have not only the bandwidth to upload and download your footage, but also the time. When I was under a deadline, it was maddening that I never knew exactly how long it was going to take for my footage to come back from the cloud so I could include it in my project. Second place is going to go to the Samsung S25 Ultra. Like the OnePlus 13, this is going to give you the ability to record 8K up to 30 frames per second, but where it really gets interesting is when you open the included Pro Video app. Not only do you get 24 frames per second with full manual control in this mode, but also this unlocks Samsung's new log profile, which definitely expands your dynamic range, gives you a lot more flexibility to play with your colors. The one big drawback is I do still find Samsung's log profile to be a little bit over sharpened. It always kind of has that smartphone look. But when we're talking about low light with this camera, it's very interesting. It is also applying AI-based noise reduction, very similar to what Google's doing, but it's doing it on device. And this new low light processing does definitely make a difference. So if you're looking for the best video quality in Android straight out of camera, you really can't beat the Samsung S25 Ultra. Okay, first place, it's going once again to the iPhone 16 Pro. And the reason for this is largely due to Apple's log profile. And this is giving you a nice wide dynamic range, lots of flexibility with the color, and most importantly, I don't find it over sharpened. It's very easy to manually grade so you can match it with the footage from other cameras. And I'm constantly mixing iPhone footage in with our bigger cameras, and no one really calls out the difference there. Also this year, they've added the ability to record 4K 120p, which is quite sharp. The big limitation though is if you use the first-party app and you want to record that log footage, well, it's going to do it in Apple's ProRes HQ with absolutely massive files. And if you want to record 4K 60 and 4K 120, you'll actually have to send that out to an external drive. Now you can get around that by using those aforementioned third-party apps or even Apple's own Final Cut camera, which will allow you to shoot 10-bit H.265 Apple log footage. But simply put, even using the default camera app, the iPhone 16 Pro is capable of giving you the best video quality of any of the phones that we're comparing, so it's an easy number one. Okay, I think I've given Chris's overheated brain a little bit of time to cool down, so maybe he can wrap us up now.
Now I know there's so many more things that we could test, but we just want to keep this video as succinct as possible and stick to the things that we use most often in smartphones when taking pictures or doing video. And you've heard Jordan's video conclusions. Again, I'm not going to rank these cameras. I just don't even think that's appropriate. It doesn't make sense, but I do want to give you my sort of overall impressions of the image quality, the look and feel of these cameras. I mean, so in no particular order, let's talk about the iPhone first. I mean, clearly the Apple iPhone 16 Pro and Pro Max have some issues when it comes to their telephoto lens. I feel that needs to be updated, and their night photography mode could be stronger, but I feel like Apple do a really good job of giving you punchy saturation without going into punchy contrast. And I think a lot of people really gravitate towards that. They generally tend to have good detail. The phones are very stable to shoot with. And I do like the overall image quality that I get when I shoot on them. And I also need to add that we are doing this video in SDR, but when it comes to HDR results for photography and video, I do think the iPhone has an edge over everybody else. And that has to be appreciated when you're looking at their photos on HDR displays. The Samsung S25 I want to talk about next. The Ultra actually really impressed me, and I'm glad I got to see this comparison because I actually found myself really enjoying a lot of the image quality. Yes, Samsung out of the box do tend to still have a more overprocessed look, but they've got nice saturation overall, good contrast, everything tends to look nice and punchy. I would bring that back a little bit, but I was really impressed by the quality of their low light photography. Their portrait mode maybe still needs a little bit more work when it comes to depth maps. Next, let's talk about the Google Pixel 9 Pro. This is still, I think, giving the most realistic looking photos, and that isn't going to be everybody's cup of tea. And yes, of course, you could just set it to be a little bit punchier, but I do like that the Google always tends to control the highlights a little bit, gives us good shadow detail. I like a lot of the low light performance that we're getting, and the hardware is still excellent overall. So as a sort of general purpose camera to cover all situations, I think the Google Pixel 9 Pro does a fantastic job. Portraits are also strong. It is something you can absolutely rely on. Now the OnePlus 13, this is my first experience with the phone. It is less than all the other phones, and that absolutely has to be appreciated because value for the dollar, this actually made a really strong showing. I will say that it consistently tends to overexpose. I mean, too much contrast. I would absolutely bring that down. Highlights are always like really close to blowing out or even a little bit blown out, and I would bring that back. But I know on social media, that's probably going to give a look that a lot of people love. What did impress me with the OnePlus phone though is how it processed photos. Night mode was quite good. Portrait mode, again, too contrasty, but the depth map quality was absolutely there. And so I was actually very impressed by that phone overall, especially when you consider its cost. You know, if I'm thinking about all these different phones and I'm trying to think of which applications they're better for, I guess I'd sort of sum it up this way. I mean, first off, if you're using an Apple phone because you're already in the Apple ecosystem, that's the way you're going to go, right? And I think you're going to get a really consistent product. You're going to get images and video that look fantastic right out of the box that can go straight onto social media. And that is one of the big appeals for the iPhone user. I do wish that I had access to more manual controls as a photographer without having to download a third-party app, especially for photography. Videography, you now do have options with Apple, but for photography, you still don't. The Google Pixel 9 Pro overall, I do tend to still gravitate this way because I like the more natural rendering of the images, and it's a very versatile product. It's got good video, good photo capabilities, nice manual controls, and you do have a lot of malleability with the raw files as well. But I was impressed with the Samsung S25 Ultra, and I would say that this might even be the new expert's phone. I found that some of the cameras just tend to retain a little bit more detail than the other brands. Having that 200 megapixel option might be fun when you want to play around with maximum detail for still life shots. And the video quality is also improved on that quite dramatically. And then the OnePlus, I think this is a really interesting phone. If you want to keep the cost down a little bit, I think you're getting a lot of bang for your buck. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this whole talk. I know we covered a lot today. Do leave your comments below. I'm sure you're going to have a lot of things that you disagree with or agree with or want to see differently. And I do want to point out, we are going to have an upcoming podcast where we will address a lot of other smartphones. We're going to have a smartphone expert on to help us out with a lot of the details. And I think that would certainly be something you want to tune in for. So you can check that out on the PetaPixel podcast. Just search for that on all your favorite podcasting apps or watch for it on this exact same channel. And remember that if you want to support what we're doing here, the work that we're providing on PetaPixel.com, as well as the YouTube channel, the best way to do that is subscribe to a PetaPixel membership. There's tons of perks, which we've talked about on all the other conclusions of our videos, but definitely we'd appreciate that support. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you soon with more on PetaPixel.